Three, and we are live. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where everybody is today whilst listening to this podcast. How are things over in Connecticut? Yes, Connecticut, Laura.
Yes, Connecticut, good old USA,
Well,
and
USA.
all of our stuff that we have going on here and the world. It's good. It's good. Had a very busy weekend, finding the
Wonderful.
balance of personal advancement and having fun while many conversations were around
Mm-hmm.
things such as what
Mm-hmm.
we discuss, and
Yeah.
really being conscious and aware of merging into relaxing and growing at the same time and having a great time while sharing and expressing individual thoughts around how our world is unfolding for all of us, no matter where we are. So it was an interesting weekend.
Beautiful, 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 beautiful. I must admit, like that was very much the theme for my weekend as well, finding the balance between fun and expansion.
Yeah.
And actually, I'm listening to an audiobook called, oh gosh, I've actually gone blank. It's Become a Master Manifestor, I think it's called.
Oh, nice.
And I'm only two chapters in, and it's just these incredible little tips and hints that I've forgotten about, right? That I know, but that I kind of forgotten about over time. And it was just interesting how starting to put them into practice, how things would literally just manifest within an hour or two. Like I would go, oh, I want this, and I would just accept that I've done the work to bring that in, and I would get an email or a message an hour later going, hey, there's this opportunity or this happened or whatever the case may be, and I'm like, would you look at that? Would you look at that? It's such a lovely confirmation of how the universe actually works.
And I wanted to share something. You and I were having a personal conversation before or after last week's
Mm.
podcast. Maybe it was on Friday. We were talking about numbers, power of numbers, and how they show
Yes.
up in our life. So I wanted to practice something with the intention of when we had our podcast this morning. It's a real life experience to let our community hear that you and I, again, are authentic in what we talk about and how we live all of what we're sharing. So you had shared 111, 222, 333, but the 222 picked up on your phone. So I used that, and simple thing, we went to a big store, Home Depot, because we're renovating, and I had to return some merchandise, and it was 8222. Yes. And when we went to buy other stuff and do the exchange, it was something like 3222. So I wanted to see if I could pull in that 222 because it stuck with me, the flow
Right.
of, and so it's right there on the card. I know everyone can't see it, but even though it was $82.22, the 222 was right there.
Yeah. And
So
that's the thing. Like, when you see that, and this is just a little technique also for our audience before we get into the heavier topics that we're going to be discussing today. But when you see that, it is so, I believe, important to take a moment to acknowledge that you are in alignment.
yes.
And acknowledging that, you will then start to see that more and more and more as your, because some people say it's not the universe, it's just your subconscious mind that now starts to see it more. And I'm like,
Yes.
well, if it's not the universe and it's my subconscious mind seeing that, it's still positive reinforcement,
Yes.
right? I'm still positively reinforcing that everything is working out for my highest good.
Yes. And also
So,
to tell, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
no, no, I was just gonna say, so whichever way it works, just keep with that energetic flow of positivity.
And also remember that when this old cliche, when you argue your limitations, they become your reality. So think about, again, expansion. If someone is offering you even if someone says, oh, 222 is a numerology angelic number, and you're like, I don't know what numerology is. It's all foo-foo. I don't care. Instead of having that somewhat negative mindset, be like, what is numerology? What does an angelic number mean? Would it help me or someone I know? Let me just have fun and see the power of recalibrating my thought and my energy. This is how we begin to advance ourselves and one another in this very small, beautiful globe that we are all living on, that we really need to protect the frequency or the energy of how we think. We really truly don't understand the science behind the vibration of thought. And this is why so much is happening, because we feed into the stream of consciousness. And if more people are not as advanced as we could be, that stream will tend to draw us all in to that main flow. And just maybe the main flow is there for the contrast for us to hop out of the main flow and start to create, again, the outline of a new flow. Oh, I lost your sound.
Sorry, I muted myself because there was noise outside, and then I forgot to unmute. Apologies. I was just saying that it's so beautiful that you actually brought that up, because when we were discussing the topics for today, we were talking about wanting to discuss the grounding of exploration, right? Being able to ground into what you're feeling, what you're sensing, to be able to then explore topics that are maybe not within your normal purview, right? They're not within your normal flow. But if you ground yourself first, so you take yourself out of that heavily polarization of emotion, and you rather go, well, what can I learn from this scenario, right? And even just by saying it like that, you also diffuse, if it is a challenging scenario, you diffuse instantly just by your language, um, that tension that
Right.
may come with it.
Right.
And I say all of that because, as we've said in the description, we are going to be touching on two highly polarizing issues that, a lot of my friends out here in South Africa say, well, why do you care? And I say, well, because what happens in the United States tends to affect the entire Western world, right? And yes, we are becoming more of a global village. Yes, we are embracing unique cultures and unique ways of looking at things, but there is still always going to be an alpha culture. And at this point in time, it is still America.
Right. And that is changing, I think,
Yeah.
again, sometimes in a negative and then sometimes in a positive way, because America now has really become the hub of diversity and really, I'm going to use the word creative spirits. We've got a
Yes.
lot of people from all over the world that have been coming here and more so coming here. And for us who have been born and raised here, it's a unique situation also. Like, we won't
Mm,
get to this today, but we have issues with our borders and who's coming across our borders, and they're not being vetted correctly. So it would be like allowing complete strangers into your home,
right.
not knowing anything about them, but yet you have this compassion that you want to invite them in and clothe them and feed them and educate them and give them this beautiful opportunity. So there's so much going on, but we really do have a unique gathering of people. And the reason I'm saying
You
this
really
is
do.
my daughter just graduated from high school, and there were 300 students, and they set up all the families with the graduate in front. And the diversity of
Oh, yeah.
Americans is so amazingly beautiful and powerful. And you realize that we really are this kind of amalgamation of everyone from all over the world, in every style and every color and every thought process. It was really quite lovely what we not need to do, but I think where we're being pushed in the direction is finding out how do we take all this individuality and create the stream of fluidity so there's less negative contrast and more positive unity.
And that is very much the key. So I'm in a unique position in that I'm not in the States.
Mhm.
I have a lot of friends in America, um, on both sides of these issues, right? I have friends who are pro this and anti that and all the rest of it. And yeah, sure, sometimes it does come down to political and or religious affiliation.
Right.
But it's interesting that when I ask them about their viewpoints, and I do so from a perspective of non-judgment, I just genuinely I want to understand, why are you saying X, Y, Z, right? When you get to the crux of it, it's always so much deeper than what you just see on the media,
Yeah.
right? There's always something that makes this person go, this is why I'm pro this or anti that. And it's never just a soundbite. There's always a very deep story behind, because these decisions and these conscious stances that people are taking are deep. It's not just because, oh, I was told to believe this.
Right.
There is always a stronger story behind it as to where they are coming from. And
And
yet yeah, sorry.
oh, no, continue. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, and yet I feel as though, because these all my friends I like to believe are highly intelligent, highly nuanced, highly emotionally intelligent human beings, if I had to get them all in the same room
Right.
to be able to air their differences, they would be able to come to a very neat and very tidy compromise.
Right.
But
I
because they're not given the other person's
yes.
viewpoint, they
Yes.
can't. They stay on one side of the polarity.
And what's interesting, so for, again, the USA community, but now us going out into the globe, our media has definitely shifted. And
Mm,
this is part of why there is so many issues happening, such high emotional reactions, because we do know we are only getting someone else's viewpoint, and the viewpoint is for a specific reason that isn't necessarily for the greater good and the highest care and consideration of the country or the world. And I want to share something really quick about this. um, I have a very good friend that lives in Russia, and when I found out from that person specifically what was going on, we watched the news like everyone else, but what was actually happening with Ukraine and Russia and all of it, you honestly, if everyone knew and even heard it, your heart would crack. It is not what we're being told. And
no.
yes, there are some beautiful, strong, powerful people that genuinely care and are doing their best to bring it. But the propaganda and the media and what most of the residents of Russia, they thought the news was completely lying, that there were actual actors being hired. And it was amazing for me in my lifetime. It must have been what a lot of people experienced with Hitler, where
Mm,
what we saw and what we were told, your eyes and your ears play tricks on you because you can't imagine. So the USA tries to be the correct leader, but when your leadership, no matter what side you're on, has specific intentions, it skews it. And then
yes.
it's people, we get skewed because we want to, as individual moms and dads and kids, we want to have truth so that we can inform one another. So I think, as we were saying, it's incredibly important to express and bring these topics to light, and always enter, for me, I enter this doorway with great compassion, because a woman has a certain idea of what reproductive concerns should be. Men have a certain idea. And then young youth has a very different idea than people in their 50s and above. So it's a very unique time to take these very important topics and work through them together with the intentions of having compassion, care, and consideration
Gotcha.
for the way we all feel about it.
I'm so glad that you said two things in there. The word compassion
Yeah.
just struck me like a gong,
Yeah.
because coming back to the Russia Ukraine conflict, right? And again, I have friends on both sides of this topic. I have friends who are very pro Russia and going, well, the West should never have started encroaching, blah blah blah. They brought this on themselves, etc., etc., etc. Then you've got people on the other side going, it's the natural progression of globalization. It's more peace, it's more trade, it's more this, it's more that, it's all these other things. Why would you be upset about it? And I sit in the middle and I go, okay, I'm hearing both sides. But what I'm finding so interesting is both of those ideas fail to take into account compassion.
Yes.
If and I've had the opportunity to hear firsthand account of a refugee who managed to escape, I think 2 weeks after the shelling started. She had to live in her bathtub because her lounge had been blown out of her apartment by a bomb. She I'm not going to say some of the other stuff because it's very private, but let's just say that she was stuck on a train standing upright for 2 days.
Mm.
2 days unable to move, right?
Now,
Trying to
think
get
about
out of the
that.
country.
We really can't understand that need for survival on that level.
Right.
We
And
can't.
if you put yourself in that position, if you're able to really empathize
Yeah.
with what these human beings have gone through, would you still put them through it regardless of which side of the topic you're on?
Yeah.
And the
I'm
thing is, we have to sanitize things so heavily
yeah.
in today's day and age. It becomes, like I said, just a soundbite. Whereas
Yes.
if you take empathy into it, right, suddenly it becomes more.
And I think if we stood back for a moment, which we all have, and
Mm-hmm.
when we were listening to leadership, I'll say of Ukraine, I'll just take this point for conversation at
Yeah.
the moment. He specifically and his people were saying, we're fighting for freedom. So let's just say you take their word at heart,
Mm-hmm.
and you look at their life, and you look at their stores and their shops and their businesses and their school and their education and their music and all of what they were becoming. They basically, for the most part, were all willing to stand up to hold that life in place. Then you look at, we'll say, Russian side. And my great grandparents were born in Russia. I have history there.
Oh.
Yes. So you take that side, and they wanted to come back in and say, no, we need you to come back to this way of life. How do you again work that balance of, well, somehow we broke away for whatever the reasons are. We are here now. We want to stay here. And then you have someone else that says, but I want you to come back and be a part of. How do you, again, the compassion, you look at someone who stood on a train on their feet, but no bathroom, no food, probably nothing, to say that this forced position is incorrect, because here I am as a result of it. So, again, it's how do we work as a collective community? And I think we do what a lot of people did. We go to the people that fought for their freedom and we try to help them. We go for the people that were escaping the invasion. We try to help them. And then we also try to have understanding for why someone wants to take something back. What is your reasoning? So when we're on the outside, rather than judge it, we just try to look at all of the angles of it and how can we be of best help to either side by bringing it more together, which is what politicians and government is in place for. But then that doesn't always work well now, does it? So here we are,
And I
we're,
do think that the reason, because you're right, that is what government's supposed to do,
yeah,
right? However, and this is the closest I think anybody will ever hear me guessing to a definitive stance on pretty much anything. But the only way that I see that ever shifting and changing, the reason why I don't think the governmental style of doing things doesn't work is governments are great at
yeah,
administration, right?
yes,
They're great at allocating funds. They're great at, okay, we need more hospitals here. We need more of this. We need more of that. This is where the money needs to go for X, Y, Z, right? That is what a government is supposed to do.
right,
A democratic government, is not supposed to rule. It's supposed to administer. Okay, it's an administration.
right,
That's all it's supposed to be. It's supposed to be in service of the people. The
right,
problem becomes that when we, and I take full ownership of this, not on behalf of the collective, but as a part of the collective, we have to take responsibility for educating our emotional development
yes,
to the point where we can have open, honest discussions without getting riled. Okay. Because I've sat in between conversations where, even though I was just playing devil's advocate and I can swap just as easily to the other side if I wanted to,
right,
my emotions come up and I get all angry and I get all engaged, and the other person stops hearing me,
yeah,
right? The debate, the conversation implodes, and it becomes who can shout the loudest. And that's whether you're talking about reproductive concerns, whether you're talking about gun rights, whether you're talking about the war in Europe, whatever you're talking about, right? The actual issue, which is human suffering, which has to be taken first and foremost, gets
right,
lost in the noise. And I say that that is the actual topic because let's look at it, right?
right,
On gun rights, for instance, I have a lot of friends who are very right wing and they love their guns and no one's going to take them away from them.
right,
And when I ask them why, more often than not, there's a story about a home invasion or someone who was hurt or injured or killed, and they want to make sure that their family is always protected,
right,
which is the core issue, right? It's they are preemptively having compassion for their own family.
right,
But then I speak to my friends who are anti it, and they're going, "Well, school shootings, right? How can you be okay with this?" And I'm like, well, both very valid points
right,
because you're both actually talking about compassion for other human beings. It's just that your way of getting there is different.
right,
And if the two of you had to sit and have a discussion around it, maybe you could have something to help protect your family without it being an issue for kids being shot up at school. And funny enough, actually, when I speak to people who are pro guns and pro gun rights, they actually have the best answers in terms of what gun legislation should look like. And
I
I'm
know,
going, well, why is
yeah.
that not getting to Congress? you know?
So this is
And
what's really amazing here in the States. So I also have many friends that are in the police force, doctors,
mm,
ER, emergency crews, ambulance, all of that. Lots of my friends, a lot of women friends have guns and are now going to get licensed to carry
Hmm.
in more than one state. And it goes back to because we have blurred the lines of community protection,
Hmm.
especially here in the States. When I grew up, if we saw a police officer, and again, there are bad apples in every bunch, we're just talking
Absolutely.
conversation.
In generalization, yeah.
Yes. For the majority of people that go out into a burning building or a domestic violence call, all of that, for the most part, these are people that do something that I could never do. They put their life on the line all the
Yeah.
time. So I do have respect for that because how can I go against
Absolutely.
someone when I'm not willing to do it myself? Just like my children know when we see women and men in uniform, we stop, we shake their hands, we thank them for their service because I personally don't have the balls to go get in an F-18 and fly to some strange country and try to
Right?
take care of a whole community. Now, if our governments, our politicians, our communities were in place to protect us the way they did when we were kids, and the level of respect was correct, we would feel less need to go to those degrees to protect ourselves. But because we've had some very powerful negative experiences with law enforcement doing things absolutely unbelievably bad, right? Where the good guys turned bad, and because of the school shootings, which I grew up in the town next to Sandy Hook when all the little
Oh,
ones. Yeah, so I know what this is like, and the school shootings are rampant here in the States. We all have children. My kids just came out of, high school where we had a couple of issues. Town was shut down because they were rumors going around. I think, like you just said, when you get people together on both sides. And we go into the fourth principle of the Jekyll principles, critical thinking, and we take the emotionality out and we think with positive intelligence. How can we, as a mom and dad, an uncle and aunt, a grandparent, a caretaker, a neighbor, feel fantastic about waking up every morning, putting our children out, walking down the street, getting on a school bus, and going into a building where they are protected? We
mm.
all really do come up with great ideas. Unfortunately, the mental health issues
Oh,
are
yeah.
massive.
Rampant.
They are, and we need to
And that's
discuss.
global.
Yes. So, very quick story. I have a friend that just had to go into the emergency room. He had congestive heart failure, an older neighbor of mine. There were 42 hospital beds because he was talking to the police. Police all over an emergency room, hospital beds, 42 of them lined up in the corridors of one of our top hospitals, all mental health related human beings that could not
Mm.
get cared for were now infiltrating a hospital where people with congestive heart failure were in line waiting. So we're in what they say a world of hurt because everything is being skewed because of the emotions coming out of it. How to deal with mental health. I'm sure you and many listeners know, right in our beautiful state of California, it's turned into a little bit of a cesspool because of the homeless. They're literally
Yeah.
going to the bathroom in the middle of the street when you're trying to walk with your family going into a store. These are very real issues that we need to figure out together. Like you said, human suffering. How do we use our incredibly beautiful, powerful minds, creative minds, and hearts to help one another and alleviate a lot of these negative consequences?
Thank you for putting it that way, actually, because we do have these incredible minds.
Yeah.
And when we do the work, we can come up with decent solutions. It's just that I think the easy route is almost always a violent one, right?
It
It's
is,
always, oh well, just move the homeless out. To where?
right.
Where are you going to move them to? Right? So now you move them and then you've got the same issue again. Okay, well, build more shelters. That's proven to not be effective in the past.
Um,
It doesn't work in South Africa. It hasn't worked all over the world. Why would you think it's going to work there? And then everybody goes, well, then I don't know what to do. No, no. Let's sit down and let's actually think about it. Let's actually take the time to figure out what needs to happen. And I keep saying, whatever the issue is, it comes back to education.
always.
But I'm not talking about just your academic 1+1 ABCs. I'm talking about education in terms of being able to broaden your horizons mentally and being able to have the emotional wherewithal to roll with the punches, to be able to pick yourself up and go, a better day is in store for me. And I say that because I look at, there's quite a lot of youth here where I live in the small town of Gansbaai in South Africa. And I've sat chatting to them. Some of them are 18, 19, 20, around about that age group. And barring, I think, one or two who are very, very, let's say, woke and, very mentally advanced actually for their ages.
Mm,
The rest, whilst they are emotionally quite advanced for their age, there's this level of dejection
yeah.
of this is my life and this is what my life is always going to be. And when I talk to them, you can literally see that they want to look outside of the box,
Right, but they don't.
but they don't feel that they have the right to.
Right. And you know what? That's great. And I'm so sorry because that I was
Mm,
the disempowerment that's
there
in
we go.
place. And again, I'm going to use this word a lot. It's in place. The contrast is in place, not to keep us in place, to actually awaken us to get out of that place. And
Yes.
if the youth would realize, regardless of what all of social media, all of the influence, all of the government politics, look at it as a mechanism to this woke movement. Don't take it the way it's being presented. This is an awakened moment for you
Mm,
as an individual. This is not for you to become part of a woke stream
no.
of commonality, of mediocrity, of mass thinking.
Thank you.
The woke movement, I'm going to say, is in disguise for the higher intelligent people, which is all of us, to
Every
move
single
out
one.
of,
Yep.
yes, move out of that mass lane. Again, become an outlier, become outside of the box. When you don't want to get out of that box, that's when you need to bust through it. There's something amazing outside of the box. Always go past what you see. I've told my girls this. Whatever you hear, go past it. Whatever you see, go past it. However you're thinking, go past it. There's a reason, because there's something outside of that messaging. There's something more there for you. So use the contrast. So
So
go ahead.
something very strongly is coming through for me right now, and I'm actually just enjoying the experience because as you were talking about that, I was thinking about the fact that I have this one friend, right, and we share a love of Star Trek. Actually, all the old Star Trek shows and all the rest of it. The new ones, he's got his other issues. He's like, I'm not so sure that I love these, but we'll get there. Um, and funny enough, the one thing that we both always said we loved about Star Trek is the one thing that he kind of doesn't love about society at the moment. And I'll get to what it is in a second, but I asked him why, and he's like, well, because it's just nonsense. This is our society as a whole got to where it is because of, and I'll bring up what it is, competition, right? Competitiveness created our society. And I go, he's not wrong, okay? Because if you look at it, when society first started out, you look at when we were tribal and living in caves, there was a lot more of a feminine energy because it was all about what's good for the collective. Everybody had their role, but it was what keeps the clan or the village or the cave safe, right? And everything was in flow and in tune with nature because it had to be, right? You didn't necessarily know about agriculture, you couldn't necessarily keep livestock, therefore you were at the whim of the elements and you were at the whim of the cycles of the moon, the stars, everything else.
Right.
Then at some point we discovered agriculture, we got the wheel and we got all these things on the go and we figured out we could build things, right? And that millennia was very, a couple of millennia was very masculine driven, right? It was competitive. Who can build the biggest building? Who can amass the most wealth? Because the other thing is now we discover money as a form of bartering. Whereas before, money didn't really exist.
No.
Right? But this became an important part. And therefore, success was very much about what you had accumulated, whether it's how many wives or how many children or how much land or how much gold, etc., etc., etc. That's now shifting again, right? And I said to him, because his actual concern was, he's like, I hate those schools where, there's no first place or second place, it's just everybody gets a participation trophy. And I'm going, I hear where you're coming from because competition is good. It spurs development, it spurs evolution, right? But when I speak to, again, coming back to kids, 18 to 20, and I bring up Star Trek from the perception of, here's this perceived utopia where money no longer exists. And therefore, everybody does their passion because there's no need for money, right? Energy is free. They have matter replicators, so you can replicate anything you want.
Right.
Therefore, your life would become incredibly boring very quickly if you didn't have something to fill your days. And my question always to people is, if money was not an issue and you could literally just walk into a store and get absolutely anything you wanted, what would you fill your days with? And suddenly you see this literal terror go into these people's eyes because they're like, what would I do?
And again, this brings us back to the journey is about an interior journey. Most people go outside to fulfill. So many people we could talk to and ourselves and listeners in our community would probably be like, oh my God, I would hike in the Appalachian Mountains. I would go and live in a hut. I would see what it was like to be an artist or a monk or a writer and whatever it may be. But interesting enough, when you said Star Trek, the exploration is so expansive because they're traveling the galaxies. So there is no end to exploration. And even if you hop upon societies on planets, different galaxies, and yes, there's systems in place, you almost always know you can hop off planet and go search the stars.
Do whatever you want.
And I think that's why, again, this expansion is so important. When you're sitting in a pub talking to someone and seeing in their eyes and feeling that palpable fear of, is this all there is? This is such a human conditional thought. No, this is not all there is. This is not all there is. This is what we're trying to tell you. So even if government is in place and you feel that the masses have elected someone and now reproductive concerns are being turned on their head, gun rights are being flipped inside out, do not get stuck in the framework of this moment. Keep going past. So if they're forcing this on me now, where is my creative juju? What can I do to move past this moment in history so that whether it's a day or a year or a decade from now, I could have some positive impact and I can shift it again. Maybe never back, but I can keep shifting it so more people get heard. There's more nuance within these decisions.
Because the discussions are so So actually, I want to say two things on this. The one is, and I'm going to say this just in passing, but I'd actually love us both to come back to this maybe a little bit later in the show. Um, but I suddenly thought of a challenge for both you and me and our listeners as well. I'd like to challenge us all to take some time this week to do a little bit of journaling and describe our perfect life. It has to have two aspects to it. The one, it has to be something that you would fill your days with for at least a decade without any form of pay, knowing, however, that you would be handsomely rewarded for it. And the
Mhm.
only other thing that it has to cover is it's some way, shape, or form, it has to give back to the collective.
Yeah.
And I say that because, for instance, I do not want to go hiking the Appalachian Mountains because it's just not me. I want to be
Right.
dropped off in a helicopter, the wonderful log cabin, and enjoy the view. I ain't
Right.
walking nowhere. Okay, it's not happening. However, if for there's a lot of people who love doing that, right? And a way to give back to the community would be to take wonderful imagery and videos of that
Right.
and share it with the
Right.
people like myself who are never going to hike that,
Right.
but would love to go along for the experience. Why not have someone who does that and that is their passion, right?
My cousin is actually doing that, which I could not. I'm a little too she and want the comforts of home, but we are hikers because we're just athletic. But
Right.
he is on the entire Appalachian Trail
Oh,
all by himself, and he sends us pictures. He was petting a baby fawn.
oh,
She wasn't injured. The mom, for whatever reason, was off somewhere else. He made sure I mean, he's drinking pure fresh water from the streams. He's going
oh.
into these little towns and meeting people, going back out, sleeping in nature, things that I would be scared, right? I would just be like, oh my God, we have bears and our foxes and bears that walk across our lawn in the middle of the day here. And we're like not in the woods. So you're right. He takes pictures and shares this amazing journey with me, who probably will never hike. I've been on that trail, but not that extent. So that's a perfect way to express to people. So you could have someone that loves to hike, but someone that would love to know what would that be like, but I may never do it. And there's a way to exchange and barter right there.
Right. It's right there, right there.
Yes. And let me add this too. There it became, I believe, a I don't even want to say reality show because it was not in that framework. There was a
Hmm.
beautiful woman and man with, I believe they had one child at the time. They were on a very small sailboat. They were very successful, but that grind of what we're talking about, something happened to them and they took off in this boat, went all over the world and started filming it and putting it on YouTube, and they became a global sensation. And
I
people started paying them. And that's exactly what you're talking about. How we could
Doing
learn,
your passion.
yes, and barter with one another. I love food. I want to travel, but people pay for the traveling, and then I share the food and where I'm staying, and the homeowners and the innkeepers, and there's so many ways. Again, we're going to remind everyone, your mind was created for expansion, not a little bit. We're talking expansion of
Infinite.
galaxies. You are that brilliant. You
Yep.
are.
Yep.
We are.
So we've just in real time, everyone, proven that with just the tiniest little bit of brain power, we can actually create a new paradigm like
Yeah.
that.
Yes.
And I raise that because I want to come back to one of the topics that is, and I'm going to be very careful about the language that I use. I'm going to say very polarizing. Okay. And interestingly enough, it's one of the topics that I am very much on both sides of in an odd way. And that's reproductive concerns.
Yeah.
So people always ask me, like, if you were living in the States, where would you come down on this?
Right.
And my answer is always, I'm anti-abortion for me if I had a uterus,
Right.
but I'm pro personal choice for everybody else because I've been in a situation
Right.
where my choices were very dictated. And yes, abortion is a slightly different topic for sure. but it does still come down to a person's personal rights over their own body.
Right.
However, I raise this because there's two people on the right that I follow quite heavily on social media, for the simple reason that whilst they can get sometimes a little bit divisive and sometimes a little bit rude, even on certain topics, and I'm like, nah, you could have said that in a nicer way. I
Right.
do find them to be a lot more logical on certain things and trying to speak to the facts a lot more, right?
Right.
And that is Candace Owens and her, I think it's her chief of staff. I can't remember her full name, but it's on Instagram. She's GM Florio.
Okay.
And she was interviewed on a podcast, and this person said, "But okay, so you are pro-life?" And she goes, "Well, first of all, no, I'm not pro-life." She goes, she hates the term pro-life because that automatically assumes that someone else is pro-death.
Right.
And she's like, she can't believe that anybody is pro-death. And if you put it that way, no one is, right? And she then brings out a whole bunch of statistics that I was not aware of, where she says most people who are anti-abortion actually spend a lot more in terms of um, foster care, donating to foster care, helping out with unwanted pregnancies, and that sort of thing, right? Again, I don't know. That's the statistics that she quoted. I have not done that research myself.
Right.
Then I spoke to a friend of mine on the left of the issue, going, but what about the fact that these laws don't protect people who have been raped?
Right.
And I don't care what scenario that rape is in, right? Whether it's incest or whatever, rape is rape, okay? If you've passed out at a party or it started off with yes and it ended off with no, rape is rape. I don't care how you cut that particular cake. My thing is, both of those stances and viewpoints take into account human compassion.
Right.
But the core of the issue pulls both ways. However, I do feel that if we had to get someone who is highly versed in terms of their stance on the rights of the issue versus someone who's well versed on the left of the issue, but they were able to come together from the perspective of this is why I want it this way.
Right.
The other person might then go, okay, well, I want it this way because of XYZ. Can you see my perspective? Of course. If you have just those two perspectives, right, no one is going to go, well, yes, I'm pro-death. And no one is going to go, well, if you got raped, you should just keep the child, even if you can't afford it. You're walking down the street, you're working 3 jobs, and you got raped, tough. No one's going to say that.
No, and I even hear I just heard a local conversation on our radio station, our big radio station here, that no one they're going to put addendums in to these laws for rape and incest and all of this stuff because who would not? I mean, seriously, who
Well,
would
no,
not?
the scary thing is that there are 2 states, I'm not going to name them, but there are 2 states that have never had addendums in there for
No,
rape or incest.
but
And I think that is scary. But the majority, yes,
and I
it's
think
there.
I I can't imagine that as this moves throughout the time ahead, um, that won't shift. It may take a little longer than most of us would like, but there will be leadership in that direction that each state now has
Yes.
ownership of these decisions. It's no longer the government. So for if we have younger kids and they're not too sure, so before government made a law, now each state gets to create what they feel is the appropriate structure of if,
And
when,
implement
how
it.
to abortion. Now this is where empowerment comes in. You read and you research beyond just the local news, just the local newspaper, just what social media is telling you. Become an educated human being in research so that you then can go and elect the person that most is aligned with what you want. This is the power of the freedom of self-educated, self-actualized being. And I want to just say something too, because it came to me.
Yeah.
You were saying something. I heard education of a heartbeat. So I don't know why, but that's so now look at the science also. This will help. I have two daughters, 18 and 21. So you can imagine where their mindset is. They were basically raised on social media with me trying to balance it out. We've talked about this and a lot of what their girlfriends are discussing. And some of them look at, we'll say, abortion, termination of abortion in a very accepted, I'm almost
Yeah.
going to say lighthearted way because they've just grown up with that freedom that it's there. Then we have other discussions with some of the young women where they have more religious structure in
Mm.
their home. And then we have a few that are in nursing programs. So they're starting to learn about the anatomy and the heartbeat and when is there actual a detected heartbeat in the little fetus. All of this can come into discussion. So no matter which way each person is, if we bring in elements and components of fact, real science, if we allow compassion and emotion to have a place, if we then allow true education through statistics, and we bring it all in and we put it out on a huge board, a huge wall of all of it, and we start moving it in to places, we can find solutions so women feel empowered and in control of their body. I am a firm believer to educate our girls and more importantly, our boys of what the
Yes.
act of raging hormones and chemistry can produce. Be smart about protection and birth control and taking care of your bodies and maybe enjoying the beauty of exploration into sensuality and sexuality. But maybe there's a time and a place of responsibility to it because these other things can happen. So again, I'm just talking think about everything we've talked about today and how many points of interest, concern, and education we can expand on to help move these types of issues along in better directions. So, and I know that there are programs in place, but life happens. And then there
Life happens.
are places. So let's say you are being careful and you are using precautions, but something happens anyways. But then maybe that there are places to go for foster care, for adoption, or if you want to maybe have your baby, you have the help. And if you don't, you know, again, we are a beautiful, smart, brilliant, caring world. Let's move on that frequency more and keep working to figure out how a decision does not send us all down the rabbit hole where we can get up by our bootstraps, talk about it, and keep working it through, not right away, but so that sooner than later, there is more of a calming collective agreement that is for the betterment of humanity.
There was a point I was going to make, but it slipped away from me. But I was going, after you just said this about educating our boys as well.
Yes.
I had a conversation with a young gentleman fairly recently, and it was about pregnancy because he's got a beautiful young girlfriend and they're sexually active and but I could sense that neither of them really thinks about protection too often, right? And so they're not the safest. It is what it is. So I had a conversation with him and I described what a woman goes through emotionally because of the hormones through a pregnancy. And it
Right.
was a long discussion because I explained things in pretty much graphic detail. I'm like, this is what happens and blah, 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 blah. So then if the fetus is aborted, or if the child is born and is stillborn, or if the mother has to give it up for adoption, all of these different things result in different chemical releases. And this is what the woman's body goes through as a result.
And it lasts her whole life through
Her whole life.
of those
And
experiences.
he looked at me like,
Right.
what?
Yeah.
And I went, I'm sorry. Not, I didn't say I'm sorry. I just said, it's interesting that this is the first time, I mean, he's 20 years old. Like, this is the first time that you're hearing this.
Yeah.
And his girlfriend actually said, she's like, I didn't even know half of the stuff that you're
Yeah.
sharing with us. I didn't know that that's what happens. I'm like, yeah, because we don't have these discussions. We don't talk about it.
Yeah.
And yet, if we did, young girls would be a lot more careful, right? And young boys would be a lot more empathetic because
Yeah.
they'd be like, well, it's not just about me. It's not just about a quick roll in the hay. There are
Right.
things that happen to our bodies that a law that boils it down to, yes, you can abort and no, you can't, doesn't begin to cover.
No. And that's really, I think, why the emotional reaction is so heightened. We're not realizing this goes back this all up. How are we
Mm-hmm.
raising our youth? What are we teaching our girls? So I
Are
have
we
two,
educating them?
right? You need to educate our children. And I mean that our global children, teaching young men the dignity, the integrity, the
Dignity.
beauty of what lovemaking could be opposed to sex. And I'm not saying boys don't have a good time. We're
No,
not
sure.
saying girls don't have a good time. Again, when we have these conversations, we're trying to work out loud the genius of what we can create together. So I've taught my daughters, and one has taken it very much to heart. The other's much more playful and lighthearted. The body, the mind, the soul is a temple. It is a place of reverence.
Yeah.
It is not a place to be walked upon and trampled upon and used. It is a place, it's sacred, but it's very difficult to express this to younger generations. Again, social media and the spillage of everything goes. So trying to find the balance of, I'm going to use the word old fashioned virtue, value, um, ways of life and merging it with the modern coolness of self expression and really trying to teach our youth that you can do something incredibly unique. And as you have said, right now in history, everything is at their fingertips. But let's empower our youth to explore chemistry and sexuality differently so that the outcome is less painful, less emotional scarring. And how do we do that? So when you hear the issues of and for or against abortion, it goes deeper for you than that. It
Yeah.
isn't someone, maybe don't look at it like some old white man in the government is taking away my right. Go deeper now. Okay, this is the contrast that's out in the world right now. What am I going to do with it? How am I going to navigate this new terrain? Don't feel that anything's being forced upon you. Recalibrate the thought. This is in place to empower me. How can I now create a movement with myself, with my sister,
And
with my girlfriends?
as you were saying that, I instantly had this vision of a young woman, and this is, I think, just my mind at play a little bit. I don't think it's like a vision, but I had a vision of a young woman sitting in, let's say, Texas, hearing this news and going, okay, so this is my new reality.
Right.
And then hopping on a podcast and challenging, and I see her as like 16 or 17 years old, challenging her lawmakers in her state and going, right, so you've made this law and you're wanting to do this. Here's how I would like to protect our young woman.
Yeah.
How would you take this on board? What are you going to do to make sure that my rights are not affected? How are you going to make sure that I am safe?
Right.
How are you going to make sure that I feel safe? Not just that I am safe, but that I feel
Right.
safe. Here are my suggestions. What are you going to take on board and what are you not? Because we can all post a meme, right? I hearken back to when people who were not even in the States were posting things about Black Lives Matter. And I'm like, you're
Yeah.
just posting a meme. Are you actually doing something about it? Do
Right.
you actually care? or is it just the socially normal thing that you're supposed to do now? And I hate that when things are just cool, so we do it because it's cool. If you actually have a stance on something, stand up and say something. Stand up, make your voice heard from, as we've been saying here, a grounded, non-polarized perspective. Bring the empathy through and see how you're able to then start to change people's minds. Because you're not going to change it with barbed attacks, right? Because that's the first thing I saw was all these memes coming out about, I actually think there was one, it was either a senator or one of the chief justices, I can't remember, but someone whose son had gotten a girl pregnant and paid for her plan B. And she's going, and yet your dad is voting for this bill to pass. It doesn't make sense. But that barbed attack doesn't get anyone anywhere, right?
No.
It's factually true, okay, but it's not going to make anybody on the other side of the aisle go, oh, well, we should think about that. It just raises walls.
And that's, again, contrast to movement. Empower the path. Forge a path. This is why we keep be an explorer. What would you do back in the cavemen and women days, which I know a lot of our youth are like, what are you talking about? But figure out what metaphor will work for you. You are now an explorer into empowerment. How can you begin to shift the collective? Do not add to the collective, because all you're doing is emphasizing stagnation into a topic that's just going to keep repeating. All of what's happening is happening for our younger generations and a few of the older generations to forge new exploration into positive intelligence, into global empowerment, and to really begin to, like you said, let's bring that compassion, that empathy back in. So we hear, we listen, and then we create outcome, rather than just, dig our flag in and hold steady. And again, we'll hop right over to the gun rights too. How do we protect our youth? So, for instance, 2 towns right now in Connecticut immediately put into place guns on school grounds immediately. They're already doing it. They're like, we had it. We need protection. We can't wait to figure it out. So right now, we're going to let all the community know, any youth, you want to go gun happy on us, you're not going to make it into the school. Now that's creating other topics, but all the parents that I've talked to right now feel amazing about their kids right now going to school, opposed to other towns right next to it. They're like, oh my God, now are these crazy? I don't want to use that word. That's what she said.
Those mentally unwell.
They were saying, are these crazy times going to continue? But I had said, they're not crazy times. They're important moments in history that are to bring us, again, deeper, further than what's at the forefront. We have to keep going to the next layer, the next level, because it's not working. But some people put in play right now, let's put not security guards with no guns, actual law enforcement. Let's put them in place. Let our community know, not here, not now. And does that mean that every school in the United States eventually will have armed forces? I don't know. There's some schools that have metal detectors. You can't get through the door. So we're going to have to figure out, maybe we create a wall of security, and then the freedom of exploration is within that wall while they're in school. I don't know what the answer is either, but we're going to have conversations about it. But
I would like to see, if I may just lend an opinion on the matter.
Yes.
Because I don't necessarily think that more guns are the solution, but I think they might be the solution for right now.
Right.
Whilst we figure out what the solution is.
Right.
right? So the same thing as I use the example of Western medicine versus Eastern health modalities, right? Eastern health modalities are stuff that takes a while to kick in. But if you have a tumor that needs to be cut out right here, right now, you need to
Right.
get it out, right?
Right.
So you unfortunately have to harm the body. It's highly traumatic to have surgery, but you
Mm.
do it because right here, right now, I need to save the overall organism. And then I can introduce the stuff that's going to make sure that this never happens again, right?
Great analogy. I love that analogy.
It's the same thing. So, right, the best solution is probably not more guns. But for
Right.
right here, right now, in order to save the organism, because the disease is rampant and it is virulent, right?
Right.
You
Right.
probably have to put certain things in place. Absolutely.
So the
I
way I,
do, yeah.
yes, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I do then believe that the issue comes back to, yet again, emotional education. And this applies to both guns and reproductive concerns. Because I was actually thinking earlier about when I was a kid and we had puberty week, right? We all were 13 and we
Yeah.
had puberty week. And I remember it being an unmitigated disaster. Nobody could keep a straight face. All the boys were giggling and drawing penises and poking the girls and being like, does that really happen to your body? Ew. And the girls are like, stop being so mean. And it was just, and the poor teacher's like standing there going, you have to listen because we have to do this. And the teacher's the most uncomfortable of us all.
Right. Right.
And I look back at it and I think, had we had actually probably a little bit of meditation or breath work beforehand, just to calm the mind to accept new ideas in. So we're not on this, because I mean, we're kids. Your energy levels are up here. Your hormones are doing God knows what at any given time. And now you're having what is ostensibly an uncomfortable topic only because you don't have the emotional wherewithal to
You're
deal
having
with
an
it yet.
adult topic with an underdeveloped mind. There's no way it can align.
So if you had that proper segue first, where you teach the mind to start to accept new modalities in, right? Now you can have a much more, and I'm going to use that word again, empathetic discussion.
Yeah.
Where it's, oh, instead of it's like, oh, does that really happen to your body? It's now, oh, so that's what happens to your body. I
Right.
can respect it,
Right.
right? And the same thing with the gun issues. The gun issues in the United States, and I'm going to say this out loud, it affects other countries as well because other countries look at it and go, well, they're doing it there. I see it happening here. The more crime goes up, the more people want to arm up.
Right.
And I'm like, if we were able to catch it before it happens, and
Yeah.
by that I don't mean figuring out who's going to commit a crime. I'm talking about figuring out who's mentally in a state of I'm not okay. And that point of I'm not okay is getting to the point where I can no longer do this and I'm going to snap.
It's again, we're always aligned. I write a little bit about this in the Science of Empowerment about catching the consequence before it even plays itself out, and we'll bring that up somewhere down the road because it's a phenomenal way of living life. It's a principled, disciplined, but incredibly empowering way to move through your day because you just have again this flow of positive intelligence which makes you realize that you can be safe, you can protect yourself
Mm.
because you're already kind of seeing things. Now I know someone in our local school system who's very high up in the development of programs, and I was saying to this woman there should be somewhat of a mind analysis sheet, test, family fill out about this before kids enter school, and we should follow them. So kindergarten all the way up, and it should be, there's not. It doesn't have to be complicated. It could be maybe 10 simple questions that mom, dad, and kids fill out. You have a 5-year-old, let them fill it out. Are you happy? Do you love mom and dad? Do you have friends? Do you like animals? What do you watch on TV? It could be simple. So you start to see the development of where that changes. Now, yes, can people not be always truthful, less authentic, but you can still have a rhythm to this information. And then maybe once a year, and there's lots of people, such as myself, that would volunteer if there was something in place where I would, like a guidance counselor, but like you would come in once a year, you would take a month and you'd work 8 hours a day and you'd 300 kids and you would ask them some questions and we would start to see, like you said, is there a breakdown somewhere? Is
Yeah.
something shifting? Maybe you have the parents come in again at the beginning, the middle, the end of the year. We have to find ways to work together. Have parents want to be more accountable, or someone like me less, because I'm one of those helicopter parents. Um, but find a way to work so that if we are seeing, are there guns in the house? Have you talked about reproductive rights? Are you allowing your teens to have sex? Do you know? Are they having sex? Are they addicted to vape? Whatever is up, how can we start to work this through so there's more accountability, more awareness to what is happening to the minds of our youth, so that they're not feeling so despondent that this is their only recourse to not only kill themselves, but to take the innocence away also of other people. There's the disconnect. Where is it? How can we empower one another within our own families? So, everyone listening right now, what can you take from this podcast and go into your own family? Talk with your siblings or to your church or to your athletic group after school if you're playing sports. What can we do to say, hey guys, can we take an hour this week and have a meeting with the coach and talk about these issues? How can we work together? Because there might be someone within our group that looks fabulous, lives in the big McMansion down there, but is absolutely cracking inside. What can we do
Right.
together? And so that's, maybe that's a little message. I don't want to say a little message, a big message to our listeners. How can you become an explorer and a leader, leadership of expansion from this podcast in the next days ahead, to try to offer positive intelligence, care,
Yes.
compassion, and empathy, and see if you can begin to, almost like the pebble in the pond, begin the reverberation out of something that can help heal these polarizing issues down the road.
So I think those are, as we start to wrap up this episode, I think those are the two exercises that I really want us both and our listeners to really try and use this week is design your perfect life, and remembering that it has to be your passion. That's the one thing. And the second thing is it has to some way, shape, or form give back to the collective, whether it's just through pictures or recipes or research that you found. And because I actually have a friend who just loves sitting and doing research. She'll sit for hours and research odd topics and then write the longest emails to us all about what she's found. It's
That's
like,
so cool.
it's so much. I'm like, but who has this guy? She's like, I love doing it. So, and it'll be random things, just random. Anyway,
He's like a walking, living library.
literally, like
I love that.
Encyclopedia Nicole. But
Yes.
that's the one thing. And then the other thing is, let's really look at how we can start to empower ourselves on polarizing topics from a place of compassion so that we can start to really create ripples out of love and acceptance, as opposed to planting our flag in the sand and going, this is my rights and this is what I'm going to. How do we bring compassion into it? How do we start to look at the other side of the polarity? And how do we shift that to a more neutral stance?
And not being accepting when you know the, and I'm going to use these words, the framework or the structure is seeping out in a negative way. Not like letting someone express themselves when you know maybe it's self-harm or there's something underneath
Yes.
it. Like, how can we help one another, support one another, and not be afraid to, I'm going to say, be unwoke for a moment, so that we can reawaken in the next moment in a way
Yeah.
that's more supportive, and more expansive. Because I know, even again, my kids and all their friends, and I talk, because of all my coaching and all my empowerment work, I really ask a lot of questions to see what is truly going on in their minds, their hearts, their body. How do they look at all of this stuff? And I will see them all talking, and they want to accept, no matter what they all say, oh, it's all good, it's all good, girl, it's all good, babe. They really have this language where, oh, it's all wonderful. And I've injected into the conversation, no, that isn't. Why are you saying it's all wonderful? Are you really hearing what she's saying? Let's go deeper. What is she really saying? And why are you so accepting? Why are you so afraid to really look at one another and say, really? Are you really okay with that? And is that an authentic feeling, or are you just wanting to be accepted? Do you just want to be part of the mass? Why are you so afraid to step outside of that box and maybe open this massive doorway for others to step out? And some of them look at me like, oh, that's just your mom. She's the author. She talks all over the globe. She's got this cool brain, but she's a mom. Some of them will really have incredible things to say. And we kind
Yeah.
of have these spirited conversations. And some of them, you can see, will just, they don't know how to get out. And so, again, to all the moms and dads, to all the people that are in position of guidership, of mentorism, of leadership,
Mm,
really work on exploration of expansion first for yourself, so you can start to feel what this is, and bring along your family, your friends, your neighbors, your community. Bring them to the podcast, bring them to the Science of Empowerment. Read this book, hop on Life Empowerment Coaching, keep growing, keep expanding, so that we can really build this youth up, so that they don't face the dissension and the violence the way we are experiencing life right now, and they not have a utopian, fluffy, faux
no.
life. They have a deep, authentic
Yes.
way of dealing with the ever-changing world.
And I'd like to end off by saying, don't be afraid to ask hard questions. Because I was having this chat actually with um, this kid. He's 19, I think, and deeply religious. And it's actually so beautiful to see that he's got such a strong faith
Mm,
in his religion. And yet he doesn't mind someone like myself who's spiritual but not religious, right? And we're having a whole discussion on different beliefs and modalities and all the rest of it. And I said, okay, I'm going to play devil's advocate for a second just to challenge you to think a little bit deeper on certain things. And we're chatting, chatting, chatting. And he goes, well, some things are just wrong.
mm,
And I said, like what? And he goes, well, like murder is wrong. And I said, why? Now, I first said, is it? And he goes,
mm,
yes, of course it is. So I said, okay, let's assume that murder is wrong. Why is murder wrong? And his response was, well, because the Bible says so. And I said, well,
mm,
actually, it doesn't. It doesn't say that. At no point does the Bible say, thou shalt not kill your fellow humans. What it says is, you shall not kill your fellow tribesmen. So the
mm.
Bible was very clear that don't kill another Israelite because the tribe needs to get strong. But anybody else of the tribe, you Gentiles, have at them. It's fine. It wasn't said like that, but basically that was the thrust of it. And when I said that to him, his face like literally drops. He's like, I'm like,
Yeah,
right. Now I'm not disagreeing with you. I do believe that murder is wrong,
right.
but I'm challenging you to try and figure out why it's wrong.
Or
The
why
moment
it's presented as being wrong in the Bible, in that story, and carried through with no modern discussion to it.
right. And the moment I said that, he went, oh, and he literally said, you could see his mind starting to go, okay, so if the Bible never actually said that, why do I believe it Is it just my moral compass? Is it this? Is it that? Is it my societal conditioning? And he started, you could see all these questions starting to go through his mind. And I'm like, that's what I want to see.
Yeah.
Because now you're able to actually elucidate on what it is that you're feeling more effectively to somebody else, because you can explain it from a more rational perspective, not just because a book, your mom, your government, whatever told you you're supposed to feel XYZ.
Right.
And that is what I'd really like to challenge everybody to do, is whatever your belief is, whatever your belief structure is, I'm not saying you need to throw that out the window. I would like everybody to really think, why do you believe it?
Right. And have fun with that. Don't
Yeah.
take it in this way that anyone's trying to change you, shift anything in you. It's all exploring. You're developing your mind. You're learning how to refine the mechanism of
Yeah.
positive intelligence. This is where true empowerment comes from.
Laura, you could not have said it any better.
Yeah.
That is actually the perfect, that's the perfect end to our show today. I shall say nothing more. Because that is, Laura's hit the nail on the head. That is where true empowerment comes from.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, some general housekeeping. We will not be back next week, same time, same place, as it is the 4th of July in the United States. And even though I do not live there, I work mostly for American companies. So I'll probably also be off and celebrating with all of you.
Yes.
And Laura's going to be enjoying her family and time with them.
Yes.
So we're going to decide we'll be back Tuesday or Wednesday next week, but we will still be back this Friday, I believe, Laura.
Yes, yes, I will be on the shoreline, but I'm hopping on for our tarot and power
Yes.
of the week. And then we'll I guess we will let everyone know on Friday what we're going to do for the following week. Yes. And I just a wonderful little thing to leave everyone with, thinking about the 4th of July in America, but use that independence feel for yourself, your independent movement, expansion, again, your independent empowerment. Let that be what that celebrates in you, your independent mind and your ability and potential to add greatness to the collective and not join in on the collective. I'm going to let that sit in your mind for a little bit.
Perfectly, beautifully said. Laura, thank you so much again, as always.
Thank you.
Thank you to our listeners. Actually, before we sign off, one last thing. I shared last week Friday's podcast with a couple of my friends, and the feedback that we got, both Laura and myself, was, Laura, you're an absolute natural, and we need to please keep doing this. I had a friend message me last night, middle of the night, going, I just managed to watch this now. I can't wait for next Friday's one. So yeah, I think we're doing the right thing. I do want to say to everyone though, please, 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 please send us your questions. Send us what you'd like to hear about. Send us topics that are on your minds. We're happy to discuss them in our podcast, in the tarot readings as well, and share that with.
And a thought, if you have a thought or something that just you want to share, because we will create conversations out of your thought process, and share, follow, because this is how we grow an empowerment community. And the more people we have, the more thoughts, the more intelligence, and the more we experience what it is to build a working community. And then we can bring that out and let people know this is what's happening. These are concerns. These are issues that we're talking about. Look at what people are bringing into it. This is how change becomes principle.
Absolutely. Could not agree with you more.
Wonderful.
Laura, thank you so much. See you on Friday.
See
to all our listeners, we will see you on Friday, and have a wonderful week, an empowered week.
Yes.
We hope for everyone.
Be happy and healthy.
Cheers. Bye now.